Hello there, I'm just after getting off the phone with Daniel Kinahan. He's just informed me that the biggest fight in British boxing history has just been agreed. Get up there, my boy!
The United States Department of State is pleased to announce a reward of up to $5 million for information leading to the financial disruption of the KTCO or the arrest and convictions of its leaders.
The US government has today effectively declared war on the Kinahan organised crime group, imposing sanctions against them. And to underline their importance and the seriousness with which they're treating the Kinahan group, they have imposed a $5 million bounty effectively.
As of today, the Kinahan Transnational Criminal Organization joins the ranks of Italy's Camorra, Mexico's Los Zetas, Japan's Yakuza.
They sell drugs, they sell weapons, and they offer a money laundering facility. So it's a one-stop shop.
How would you describe your relationship with Daniel?
The man's been a boxing fan. Not much more I can say. There's not much more of a relationship. There is none.
There has always been a connection between boxing and organised crime, going back to the days when the American mafia used the sweet science to make money rigging fights and stealing from fighters in the sporting equivalent of the red light district. But in the modern era, with public scrutiny at all-time highs thanks to social media giving more people a voice, and with hundreds of millions of dollars being pumped into boxing, you would assume that the sport has cleaned up its act and cut any connections with the criminal underworld. And yet, just a few years ago, a boxing management company run and funded by the boss of one of the world's biggest drug cartels quietly took over boxing in the UK and Ireland and had plans on taking over the sport worldwide. When Tyson Fury took to Instagram to announce a long-awaited fight with Anthony Joshua had finally been agreed, the reaction of most boxing fans was one of excitement. But some were left wondering how on earth a man with the vile reputation of Daniel Kinahan had been name-checked multiple times as the man who'd finally got British boxing's biggest ever fight made. Daniel Kinahan's rise in boxing, from spectator to arguably the most powerful shot caller in the sport, was unbelievable. But what was even more unbelievable was that while he was taking over boxing, he was also calling the shots in a deadly gang war that resulted in the murders of 18 people. And this war brought boxing and organised crime closer than they have ever been, with a crazy incident occurring that would cripple Irish boxing and stun the world. This video tells the story of Daniel Kinahan's rise to the top of boxing and his stunning downfall that has led to him going on the run with a bounty on his head and the boxing management company he founded collapsing. This is a crazy story that is still playing out to this day, with a $5 million reward offered by the US government for any information leading to the arrest of Daniel Kinahan, and boxers such as Tyson Fury are currently banned from entering the United States due to their links with Kinahan. Let's get into the video. At the height of his powers in boxing, Daniel Kinahan controlled the careers of most of British boxing's biggest stars and dominated one of the world's largest boxing markets, with plans for a global takeover in motion. Fighters under the control of the mob boss included the likes of heavyweight world champion Tyson Fury, former undisputed light welterweight champion Josh Taylor, two-weight world champion Carl Frampton, two-weight world champion and victim of Canelo Billy Joe Saunders, an ex-UFC fighter and social media champion Darren Till, to name just a few of a gargantuan roster, and he helped put together shows for Disney-owned ESPN, Sky Sports and BT Sport. Daniel Kinahan may or may not be a name that you are familiar with, but if you're from Ireland, then you are almost certainly familiar with a man whose reputation in the country is as toxic as you could ever get. To understand why Daniel Kinahan is so hated in Ireland, we have to go back to where it all began, with Daniel Kinahan's father, Christy Kinahan. What would become the infamous Kinahan cartel began in Dublin, where Daniel's father, Christy Kinahan, or the Dapper Don as he was later nicknamed, became a prolific heroin dealer. Born to a middle-class family, Christy was not your typical criminal growing up in poverty, but he rose quickly through the underworld ranks, albeit not without a few run-ins with police along the way. In 1986, police carrying out a raid on a house in Dublin arrested Christy Kinahan and seized over €100,000 worth of heroin, an absolutely colossal sum for the time, especially for someone who had not been on the police's radar previously. This bust saw Christie jailed for 6 years, but the Dapper Don had no intentions of changing his ways, and upon his release, he was quickly back to his old tricks. In 1993, Christie was caught by police in possession of stolen checks, but while on bail, he fled for the UK. When he returned to Ireland 4 years later for a family funeral, he was arrested by Irish police and jailed again for 4 years. But rather than convince him to change his ways, this spell in prison seemed to ignite Christie Kinahan's criminal ambitions further, and he took this time in jail as an opportunity to further both his criminal network and develop skills that could prove useful in advancing his criminality. While locked up, Christie completed 2 degrees and became fluent in Spanish and Russian, learning these languages with the sole intent of forging closer bonds with major organized crime groups who could help him level up his operations to an international scale. When he was released from prison, Christie went back to the underworld, but with a determination to avoid returning to prison, and instead, he planned to elevate himself to a point where he didn't have to get his hands dirty anymore. Before long, Christie Kinahan was grooming his sons, Christie Jr. and Daniel, for a future in the family business of dealing drugs. Both of his sons showed an appetite for the drug game and would both later ascend to senior positions in what would become the Kinahan drug cartel, with Daniel Kinahan eventually taking the reins from his father and becoming the leader. A 2009 WikiLeaks document would provide an early insight into just how deep a 32-year-old Daniel Kinahan had entrenched himself in cartel activities, as he was named in a Sierra Leonean diplomatic cable message as a prominent narco trafficker with plans on expanding the Kinahan empire into the impoverished West African country, a far cry from the streets of Dublin where his father had been plying his trade at Daniel's age. What had been started in a Dublin trap house by the Dapper Don in the 1980s was by the early 2010s an absolute monster criminal operation, making money hand over fist through large-scale drug and gun shipments, along with advanced money laundering operations. The Kinahan cartel had assets all over the world, and the inner circle was becoming richer than any of them could have ever imagined, graduating from the mean streets of Dublin to the sunny beaches of Marbella in Spain, where the Kinahans were running what was one of Europe's biggest organised crime groups. That's not to say the Kinahans achieved all of this while remaining off the police's radar, however. In 2010, a large-scale operation codenamed Operation Shovel saw Irish police, Europol, the UK's National Crime Agency and Spanish police come together to try and bring down the Kinahans. A treasure trove of cash and assets was seized, but the operation would ultimately prove to be a complete failure, with the cases against the gang collapsing due to a lack of evidence. The Dapper Don had become an extremely shrewd operator and had passed on his criminal expertise to his sons. And with Christie Sr. looking to take a step back from running things, his son Daniel Kinahan would quickly swoop in to take his place as the leader of a cartel alleged to have made over €1 billion from its activities. The decision to hand over the reins to Daniel Kinahan would take the cartel to a new level, both in terms of underworld prominence as well as brutality. But perhaps surprisingly, it would also put the cartel at the heart of boxing, with it all starting from a small boxing gym in the Kinahans' adopted home of Marbella. If you'd have been on holiday in the popular tourist destination of Puerto Banús and walked past the MTK Marbella boxing gym, you probably wouldn't have given it a second glance. From the outside, the gym looked like nothing special. If anything, it looked a bit run down. But from this little unassuming boxing club, the world's largest boxing management company would be born, with a reach that extended around the globe, with MTK's power brokers playing an important role in the murky world of boxing politics. MTK, or MGM as it was originally named before the American MGM threatened to sue, opened its Marbella gym in 2012. MGM stood for Macklin's Gym Marbella, with boxer and former world title contender Matthew Macklin one of the co-founders. But while Macklin's name was on the gym, it was his co-founder's name that would become the one most associated with the MTK brand, with this co-founder being none other than Daniel Kinahan, a man whose name and reputation was not yet at the notoriety it would eventually reach, but Daniel Kinahan was still widely ranked in Ireland and by international law enforcement as a major player in the European drug game. While he was a suspected criminal and cartel boss, Daniel Kinahan lacked the extremely high level of public notoriety that he enjoys today, and thus his involvement as a co-founder of MTK was not a dirty secret. Instead, He was front and center at early MTK events, like this one, where he's seen working the corner at an MTK white-collar boxing event in the Marbella gym. By the time the MTK Marbella gym was set up in 2012, Daniel Kinahan was extremely proficient in the art of money laundering, and his MTK gym provided yet another business to wash dirty money through. But Kinahan had far greater ambitions for his venture into boxing than just cleaning up the proceeds of his drug trafficking. Just like criminality, Daniel Kinahan had been introduced to boxing at an early age by his father Christy, who used to train and watch the sport. Daniel Kinahan had always been a boxing fan, and now with more money than he knew what to do with, he decided to start pumping it into his favorite sport, buying himself influence, and he hoped eventually buying himself some legitimacy as a serious businessman and boxing power broker down the line. The Marbella gym facilities formed part of the sales pitch for the true engine of MTK's business, which was their boxing management services. Fighters who chose to sign with MTK's management would have Daniel Kinahan and his team working with promoters to make fights, negotiate contracts, and put plans in place to help their fighter progress their career as far as possible, with MTK taking a cut of the fighter's earnings in return for their services. But MTK was also able to offer things to fighters that no other management company was offering. Targeted signings would be flown over to Marbella, put up in a lovely villa free of charge, and given access to a variety of top-level services, including high-level training and physiotherapy, free meals, and a car to travel around in with a personal driver. Once a boxer had spent time in Marbella living the high life and enjoying the facilities on offer in Marbella, they'd be pitched on signing a management and career advisory deal with MTK. As if the boxers hadn't already had their heads turned by the generosity shown to them while in Marbella, MTK also offered their management services at a significant discount to what was typically quoted by boxing management companies, meaning MTK was easily able to undercut the competition for new signings. The standard cut for a boxing manager is around 25% of a fighter's earnings, but MTK was able to offer their services for just 15%, a huge discount, and a discount that meant even more to boxers who had not yet reached the elite level and weren't exactly rolling in money. In fact, MTK's discounts seemed to be able to go as low as was necessary to get boxers to sign. When Irish boxing legend Barry McGuigan took Carl Frampton to court after Frampton left him to join MTK, it was revealed that MTK was charging Carl Frampton absolutely nothing for the management services they were providing him. Unsurprisingly, these rock-bottom charges, along with the perks offered by MTK, proved to be an almost irresistible proposition for boxers. And before long, MTK was picking apart management stables across the UK and Ireland and growing at a rate never seen before in the sport. But how on earth could MTK afford to undercut the entire industry while offering more to fighters in terms of perks and services? Well, if you're shouting at the screen something along the lines of drug money, then you'd be absolutely right. Daniel Kinahan was an extremely rich man with a vast portfolio of properties and businesses around the world. But the cartel was generating such ridiculous profits that he was more than able to pump money into MTK to allow them to sign as many fighters as possible, and it was extremely effective. The size of their roster ballooned, and this would add even more power to MTK's pitch to fighters, as MTK established strong relations with big-time boxing promoters keen to use MTK's stable on their shows. As they headed into 2015, MTK was nowhere close to the level that it would become in just a few years, but it had begun to make inroads into the world of boxing. And things weren't going too shabby in Daniel Kinahan's day job either, with the cartel continuing to flood Ireland with huge drug shipments, while Kinahan kicked back in Marbella at the gym with the trainers and fighters that he'd signed to MTK. But things in the underworld rarely run smoothly forever, and a chain of events would bring Daniel Kinahan's two worlds of boxing and crime together, with shocking scenes that highlighted the dangers of allowing a cartel boss to have such a prominent place in the sport. For an operation as large as the Kinahan cartel to run smoothly, the Kinahans relied on a number of people to conduct business on their behalf. Whether it was the Byrne family controlling the streets of Dublin, or trusted Lieutenant Thomas Bomber Kavanagh operating out of the UK, or the army of minions surrounding them in Marbella, the Kinahans ran a tight ship with absolute loyalty a demand, not a request. When it came to running their operations in the crucial shipping ports of Rotterdam and Antwerp, one of their key guys was a man named Gary Hutch, with Hutch a surname that carries serious weight in Ireland. The Hutch family are another notorious Irish crime family, led by Gary's uncle, Jerry the Monk Hutch. The Monk is one of Ireland's most famous criminals, but he took a different path in crime than the Kinahans, with the Monk swearing off drug dealing and instead earning proceeds in the tens of millions from a series of well-planned armed robberies and various scams and schemes, with the riches swiftly invested into a vast property portfolio. The criminal exploits of the Monk were an open secret in Ireland, and yet, over the course of his criminal career, he has largely managed to stay out of prison, and could be considered a contradiction to the mantra of crime doesn't pay.
In fairness, the Gardaí believe you did it.
Yeah.
There's enough intelligence to link you to that robbery. There's enough intelligence to link you to the Marino Mart robbery. The community believe you did it, and every criminal in Dublin believes you did it.
Yeah. Okay. And why would they all believe that? Not the guards, every criminal and every people in the city, because they read it in the paper. I'm beginning to believe I've done it myself from reading it in the paper.
Unlike his uncle though, Gary Hutch followed the Kinahans into the world of drugs and became a major player in the Kinahan cartel and an extremely close friend of Daniel Kinahan in particular. But despite their huge success and the money they'd made together, tension had been brewing between the two longtime friends over a robbery Gary Hutch had participated in, with Gary Hutch believing that he had not received his fair share of the proceeds. This perceived slight had left Gary Hutch incensed and disillusioned with the Kinahans, and this resentment would lead him to make a decision that would change the trajectory of his family's life forever. Jamie Moore was a former professional boxer turned trainer who was working at NTK's gym and training MTK co-founder Matthew Macklin ready for an upcoming fight. A month before Macklin's fight, Jamie Moore and the team had gone out drinking in Marbella with a group of people that included Daniel Kinahan and Gary Hutch, two men that Jamie Moore was sharing a Marbella villa with at the time. As the night out ended, Jamie Moore drunkenly stumbled back to his villa when he spotted a man dressed in all black stood outside holding a gun. Moore initially thought that it might have been one of the boys playing a joke, but the severity of the situation was made immediately clear when the gunman opened fire at Jamie Moore, hitting him several times before running to a car and driving away into the night. Jamie Moore was extremely lucky to escape this shooting with his life, drifting in and out of consciousness on his way to hospital and needing emergency surgery to remove a bullet that had come dangerously close to hitting an artery. Moore was a respected figure in the boxing world, and given he had no real criminal background, it was a story that shocked those who knew him, as it wasn't obvious why anyone would have wanted to assassinate him in such brutal fashion. A Spanish police investigation was launched immediately, but perhaps more pertinently, an underworld investigation led by Daniel Kinahan was also launched, and it ended with fingers pointing in the direction of none other than Gary Hutch, with Daniel Kinahan suspected to be the actual target of the attack. A stunning betrayal, and one that Kinahan had only managed to escape by virtue of deciding to go home earlier than the rest of the group. Gary Hutch had been asleep in the villa at the time of the shooting and was definitely not the gunman, but Kinahan and those close to him suspected that Gary Hutch had arranged the shooting, and the fallout from this would be immense. There was no question that the Kinahans would look to respond to the attack in kind, and with Gary Hutch back in Amsterdam, his life was in serious danger. In Nicola Tarrant's book Clash of the Clans, which I've linked down below, she suggests that while hiding out in Amsterdam, Gary Hutch was almost kidnapped, but after being forced into a car, he managed to escape by forcing his way out of the back door as the car was moving. It would take a miracle intervention for Gary Hutch's life to be saved from here, but lucky for him, his uncle Jerry the Monk was a man with both the reputation and financial means needed to pull off a deal to save his nephew's life. After intense negotiations between the Monk and the Kinahans that included a face-to-face meeting between Daniel Kinahan and the Monk at Marbella Airport, a deal was agreed to save Gary Hutch's life and allow him to return to Spain. In return for his nephew's life, the Monk paid the Kinahans a sum of €200,000, and one of his associates was willingly shot in the leg by the Kinahans as a punishment shooting. With the Kinahans agreeing to spare Gary Hutch, it appeared the Monk had once again beaten the odds and avoided a disastrous outcome. But it would turn out that the Monk had vastly underestimated the Kinahans. Buoyed by the confidence of the deal his uncle had brokered, a defiant Gary Hutch returned to Marbella a month after his botched hit on Kinahan, with plans on branching out on his own in the underworld. But the thing about doing a deal with a drugs cartel is you can't exactly sue them if they decide to break it. 50 days after Jamie Moore was shot, Gary Hutch stepped outside of his Marbella apartment block for what would prove to be the last time, as he was confronted by a balaclava-wearing gunman. Hutch ran for his life and begged for mercy, but it was to no avail, with 2 shots bringing an end to the chase and an end to his life. Of course, it hadn't been Daniel Kinahan who'd gotten his hands dirty and hunted Hutch himself, but there was no doubt about who had ordered the hit, and it left Jerry the Monk with no other choice than to plot revenge. Daniel Kinahan's bold decision to renege on his deal with the Monk and take out Gary Hutch may have caused chaos in the world of Irish organised crime, but the prospect of a gangland war would not stop Daniel Kinahan's plans to take over boxing, with MTK Global ploughing onwards. 2 months after Daniel Kinahan had ordered the hit on Gary Hutch, MTK hosted a major fight night in Dublin at the National Stadium, with Matthew Macklin giving Kinahan the credit for making the event happen. Not long after that, Daniel Kinahan pulled off one of his biggest signings to date, with Billy Joe Saunders signing with MTK and training at their Marbella gym. At the time of his signing, Billy Joe Saunders was not yet a top name in the British boxing scene, but he would go on to win world championships in 2 weight classes and fight Canelo in front of 70,000 fans, with most of his success coming while being managed by the cartel boss. But while to the public it appeared business as usual, behind the scenes, the Hutch family was starting to apply serious pressure on the Kinahans, and they came close to getting their top target when the Hutches received intel that Daniel Kinahan and key associates were drinking at a hotel on the outskirts of Dublin. A hitman was dispatched to the hotel, but the plan failed when the hitman's firearm jammed, and once again, Daniel Kinahan escaped without harm. It was clear at this point that there was no going back, and war had begun. The Kinahans retaliated swiftly, with one of the men suspected of being involved in the botched hotel hit killed outside of a city centre pub towards the end of 2015. As 2015 drew to a close, those following stories from the Irish underworld would have expected 2016 to be a wild year, but what transpired surpassed all expectations. Daniel Kinahan was attempting to live an extraordinary double life of boxing power broker by day and cartel leader embroiled in a gang war by night. And he was somehow largely managing to keep his 2 lives separate, with his ascent in boxing chugging on, somehow unaffected by the war brewing in the streets of Dublin. MTK Global marched onwards into 2016 with a fight card organised for early February, headlined by a European lightweight title fight between MTK and Dublin's own Jamie Kavanagh versus Antonio João Bento. The weigh-in was held at the Regency Hotel in Dublin, and to prove that war with the Hutches did not scare him and would not stop his boxing ambitions, Daniel Kinahan made the decision to attend the weigh-in, along with several other high-level cartel members, ahead of what was to be a huge night of boxing on the weekend. But perhaps Kinahan should have been scared. This shocking footage from the weigh-in shows the moment that armed Hutch gunmen stormed the hotel and opened fire, hunting for Daniel Kinahan and sending innocent journalists and boxers scrambling for their lives. Four hitmen, 2 dressed as Irish Emergency Response Police and 2 in disguises, had entered the hotel armed with AK-47s and pistols with one major target in mind: Daniel Kinahan. As the hitmen made their way through the hotel looking for the Golden Goose, they came across David Byrne, a key associate of the Kinahans, and they swiftly executed him. But that wasn't the man they'd come for, and they frantically made their way around the hotel looking for Daniel Kinahan. But yet again, Daniel Kinahan had somehow managed to cheat death and had escaped the hotel, with a witness reporting one of the hitmen shouting, "He's not here, I couldn't find him." Sensing time was running out and cops were on their way, the hit team exited the hotel into a waiting van, but not before a member of the public was able to snap a clear picture of 2 hitmen in disguise fleeing, including a man in drag. As their getaway van sped off into the distance, they left behind a chaotic scene at the hotel, with David Byrne dead and 2 Kinahan associates seriously injured. But crucially, they'd once again failed to get the man they wanted, and this failure would have immense consequences for the Hutches in the future. The events at the Regency Hotel would also have serious consequences for Irish boxing. The growing links between organised crime and boxing hadn't exactly been a secret, but it had been something that was easy to ignore for most people. But the events at the Regency made it a problem that was now impossible to ignore, with the consequences of the sports association with crime made abundantly clear in Ireland. Daniel Kinahan claims to be a massive fan of boxing and a proud Irishman, but his involvement in the sport and his involvement in the underworld events that helped cause the Regency shooting would massively damage boxing in Ireland, with Irish police extremely reluctant to allow boxing events to be hosted in the country, fearing further violence could occur. The Regency Hotel shooting occurred in February 2016 and would spark an unprecedented drought of professional boxing events in Ireland, with it still being deemed unsafe for major events to be held as of a few years ago. Ireland is a nation with a proud history in boxing, but for years, up-and-coming Irish professionals would be faced with a lack of opportunities to fight in Ireland and be forced to fight abroad, having to forego the support of a home crowd through no fault of their own. This is a situation that seems to be changing as of the last few years, with Katie Taylor in particular leading the charge with 2 major events at the 3 Arena in Dublin last year. But the fact that one of Ireland's most famous boxers ever had her first ever professional fight in her home country at the age of 36 with a record of 22-0 underlines just how badly the Kinahans' involvement damaged Irish boxing. In the aftermath of the shooting, the scheduled fight card was obviously cancelled, and the spotlight was shined brightly on the war between the Kinahans and the Hutch family, with the war taken to a whole new level. Kinahan survived but lost a close friend and felt embarrassed at being caught with his guard down. Boxing had to be put on the back burner, with the cartel boss now fully focusing his energy on crushing the Hutch family by any means necessary. To this point, the brewing war between the Kinahans and Hutches had been fairly even. The Kinahans had killed Gary Hutch and a Hutch associate, and in return, the Hutches had stormed the Regency and taken out a key associate of the Kinahan cartel, along with multiple failed attempts to get Daniel Kinahan. But this semblance of balance in the war would be blown out of the water, with a streak of complete savagery from the Kinahans throughout 2016 that made it an extremely dangerous time to be even slightly associated with the Hutch family. The Regency Hotel shooting occurred on February 5th, 2016, and just 3 days later, Eddie Hutch Sr. was gunned down by a 4-man Kinahan hit team outside of his Dublin home. Eddie Hutch was not a serious criminal and had been working as a taxi driver, but his surname had been enough to make him a victim, with the message made clear that nobody was off limits. And as the year rolled on, the bodies would pile up, with another 9 murders occurring in 2016 believed to have links to the war. But any balance in power between the Kinahans and Hutches completely disappeared, with the Kinahans showing an unmatchable desire for blood. Of the 11 people who died in 2016 with connections to the feud, only 2 of the dead had links to the Kinahans, with one of those killings being an apparent accidental suicide. Meanwhile, a shocking 7 Hutch associates and family members were killed, along with 2 innocent victims of botched hits carried out by the Kinahans. 2016 was an absolutely brutal year, and there are just too many individual incidents to cover in any detail, without this becoming a 6-hour Traplaw Ross style documentary. But 2 incidents in particular underline just how deranged Daniel Kinahan had become in his quest to eliminate the Hutches. It was no secret that anyone with the surname Hutch had a target on their back, and Jerry the Monk Hutch's nephew Gareth, not to be confused with Gary Hutch, knew he was a marked man. Just months after Gareth was pictured carrying his uncle Eddie Hutch's coffin, Gareth himself was now living in desperate fear for his life. His fear of the Kinahans was strong enough that he desperately contacted a local councillor for help writing a letter to local housing authorities asking them to move him to somewhere more secure, fearing his time was coming. Unfortunately, Gareth Hutch was proven right, and just 24 hours after writing his letter, he was ambushed outside his home by a Kinahan hit team and killed at 10 in the morning. Another tragic incident would occur 3 months later in August 2016, with another member of the Hutch family in the crosshairs of the Kinahans, with the target this time being Jonathan Hutch. But this attack would not play out in Dublin. Instead, it occurred in Marbella, where Jonathan was staying at the time. Marbella seemed an odd place for Jonathan to visit, given the Kinahans' strong ties there, and it wasn't long before he was rumbled and a hitman was dispatched to find him. But tragically, the hitman would end up shooting the wrong target, killing an innocent man on holiday in front of his wife and kids. The victim had had the unfortunate luck of striking up conversation with Jonathan Hutch, who happened to be staying in the same apartment block. Completely shocking levels of violence from the Kinahans, carried out on the orders of a man who didn't only just refuse to live in the shadows, he truly believed he could position himself as a legitimate businessman and influence in the public spotlight of professional boxing. 1 month after his cartel murdered a completely innocent Trevor O'Neill in front of his wife and 2 kids, MTK Global would announce their next major signing, with one of Ireland's hottest prospects in Michael Conlan inking a deal with Kinahan's management company. Even as the brutal and gruesome gang war hit the headlines weekly in Ireland, professional boxing could not say no to the money being pumped into the sport by Daniel Kinahan, and his rise continued, largely unaffected by his horrendous public reputation. As the war raged on, the killings would continue, with the vast majority carried out by the Kinahans, to the point that calling it a war might be exaggerating it a bit, as it was closer to a targeted slaughter of the Hutches and their associates. The Kinahans had been successful in reaffirming their control of the streets, and the signing of a certain 6'7" Gypsy King would give Daniel Kinahan and MTK Global much greater control in boxing. Tyson Fury's fall from grace after spectacularly dethroning heavyweight kingpin Vladimir Klitschko in 2015 was dramatic and disastrous. After achieving his lifelong goal of becoming world champion, all of Fury's motivation and drive completely disappeared, and his life quickly went off the rails. Fury swapped training and discipline for abusing alcohol and drugs, and he ballooned up in weight to the point of morbid obesity, disappearing from the heavyweight boxing landscape as a result. A series of scandals would follow, pushing Fury even deeper into the darkness, leading him to even contemplate ending it all, as he would later discuss on Joe Rogan's podcast.
Bad. I give up on life. And just as I was heading towards that bridge at 190 in this Ferrari, it had crushed like a Coke can, by the way, if I'd have hit it. I heard a voice say, "No, don't do this, Tyson. Think about your kids. Think about your family and your little boys and girls growing up with no father. And everyone saying your dad was a weak man. He left yous. He took me easy."
Tyson Fury was such a mess that even attempting a comeback seemed like a long shot, let alone hoping to return to the elite levels that he displayed when outclassing Klitschko away from home. It seemed like Fury's destiny was to go down in history as a waste of talent, and most people had written him off. But a certain Daniel Kinahan appears to have been one of the few not to give up on Fury, still believing a Gypsy King comeback was possible. In March 2017, in a Twitter post that remains up to this day, Fury posted a picture of him out with the Irish cartel boss, probably discussing a route back into the ring for the Gypsy King. A few months after his photo with Kinahan, and 2 years after becoming the king of boxing and throwing it all away, Tyson Fury posted a video to Instagram while jogging, promising his boxing comeback.
Guess who's back? The one and only. Shout going out to the big bronze bomber, Deontay Wilder. Big respect for giving me the motivation, telling me I can't do it, and I'm finished.
And it wasn't long before the Gypsy King found his way to Marbella to train in none other than MTK Global, alongside longtime friend Billy Joe Saunders. Fury was comically overweight, and his call-outs of the likes of Deontay Wilder and Anthony Joshua seemed farcical at the time. But Fury was truly determined, and slowly but surely lost the weight in Marbella, with Daniel Kinahan in his corner as his career advisor. Fury's links with the mob boss were covered by the media, especially Irish media, who were intimately familiar with the carnage Kinahan had overseen on Irish streets. But the story went largely unnoticed, as the Gypsy King went on the comeback run of a lifetime. And if you want to help this channel go on the run of a lifetime, please drop a like if you're enjoying the video. In less than 2 years, Tyson Fury went from obese to fighting Deontay Wilder in Las Vegas and delivering a masterclass in a legendary fight, with his awe-inspiring rise from the canvas in round 12, a moment that will be replayed for generations to come. And with Fury proudly repping MTK Global throughout his comeback run, Daniel Kinahan now had unprecedented access to the upper echelons of the boxing industry. Alongside managing one of the biggest draws in the sport in Tyson Fury, MTK Global made a number of strong signings that cemented them as the top boxing management firm in the UK and Ireland. But MTK was not content with just dominating boxing in a few markets. They wanted world domination. The unlimited supply of illicit money being pumped into the company enabled them to open a huge network of gyms located across the world, spread as far apart as Brazil, South Africa, and Kazakhstan. And MTK had over 200 professional boxers on their books. In fact, MTK even had plans on taking over MMA, with several UFC fighters signed, including Darren Till, Alexander Rakic, and Mike Grundy, to name a few. Their power in boxing was so strong that if a promoter, especially a UK promoter, had any ethical concerns and didn't want to work with the Kinahans, they'd essentially be shooting themselves in the foot, as it would mean being unable to work with a ridiculous number of fighters, which just wasn't practical given the already ridiculous rivalries between promoters that prevent fights from being made. When COVID crippled boxing and left many fighters and promoters with a huge gap in their finances, MTK went on the offensive, seemingly unaffected, and they began their foray into America by signing their first US fighter and opening a new gym in Miami. Not even a pandemic seemed to be able to stop the rise of MTK Global. However, Kinahan's ascent in boxing did not come without roadblocks along the way. As war with the Hutches was hotting up in the streets in 2016 and 2017, Kinahan's name was a fixture in the Irish papers for all of the wrong reasons. To the point his reputation was bad enough that even boxing was beginning to get a bit uncomfortable with working with the boss of a violent cartel. In 2017, as Fury was on the road back to the top, Daniel Kinahan was forced to announce publicly that he had stepped away from MTK Global and would no longer have any involvement with the company he founded. But while Kinahan wanted the media and public to believe that he was no longer running things, the reality on the back end was completely different, with Kinahan still pulling all of the strings, just not as openly as he had been in previous times due to the toxicity that his name brings. To try and highlight the fact that Kinahan was no longer involved at MTK Global, the business was sold by co-founder Matthew Macklin to a woman named Sandra Vaughan. Sandra's decision to buy MTK might have appeared odd given that her background was in running tanning salons, but perhaps unsurprisingly, she was a woman closely connected and fiercely loyal to Daniel Kinahan, with her husband also linked to MTK Global. Clearly, Sandra's role was to act as the public face of MTK Global, while Daniel Kinahan continued to run things behind the scenes. But hiding in the shadows must have been a bit boring for Daniel Kinahan, who was living in Dubai after fleeing Marbella, fearing police would arrest him. And Kinahan's lack of public presence at MTK meant boxing wasn't providing him with the businessman-type legitimacy he'd hoped could whitewash his reputation. But after the insane bloodshed of 2016 and 2017, the ongoing feud with the Hutch family had cooled down a bit, and more time was passing from infamous events linked to Kinahan's name, such as the attack on the Regency Hotel. And with the likes of heavyweight world champion Tyson Fury unequivocally backing him, despite the numerous murders connected to the Kinahan name, Daniel Kinahan would make the decision to emerge from the shadows and commit to a rebranding, aiming to position himself as a legitimate boxing power broker with nothing to hide, making serious attempts to fix his toxic reputation. But this attempt to go legit would have disastrous results, and would lead to the collapse of Kinahan's growing boxing empire overnight. The fact Daniel Kinahan had fled his base in Marbella and moved to Dubai with his family and other criminal associates was not something he tried to hide. Dubai had emerged as something of a mecca for organised crime figures, offering them the tantalising combination of extremely high standards of living along with a much smaller chance of extradition back to their home countries to face justice. Kinahan was feeling comfortable in Dubai and believed the time was right to emerge from the shadows. Deeply protective of information released about him, photos began to emerge of Daniel Kinahan with various MTK Global fighters in Dubai, including Tyson Fury and Darren Till, with Kinahan seemingly no longer interested in keeping up the facade that he wasn't involved with MTK. These posts would only have been made with Daniel Kinahan's consent, and so it appeared that Kinahan was gearing himself up to rebrand from international crime boss to boxing power broker only slightly more dodgy than Don King. Officially, Kinahan was still not involved at MTK Global, but MTK Global's CEO, Sandra Vaughan, was pictured posing with Kinahan, and Daniel Kinahan was now being officially referred to as an advisor to MTK fighters. A stupid technicality that attempted to give MTK Global some level of deniability if anyone kicked up a fuss about them involving a man wanted by just about every Western crime agency known to man in their business. The fact that fighters on the Kinahan payroll were defending him was not surprising, given they paid rock-bottom management fees thanks to Kinahan's drug money. But perhaps more surprising was the backing Kinahan got as he moved back into the public eye from figures as prominent in boxing as Bob Arum, who runs boxing for American giants ESPN. Arum described Kinahan as an honourable man and seemed keen to work more with him, spotting opportunities for expansion. In fact, Arum was so infatuated with Kinahan that he managed to convince Disney-owned ESPN to sign a multi-year deal to broadcast 30 MTK global events a year. Mickey the Mouse partnering up with a business controlled by a guy on the run from a laundry list of violent crimes. You just can't make it up. A major part of Kinahan's plan to rehab his public image was a bizarre PR campaign he funded, with the aim of claiming that the infamous attack on the Regency Hotel carried out by the Hutches was a conspiracy that involved both the Irish government and police, who wanted Kinahan dead and allowed the attack to happen. Hilariously, the first part of this PR campaign was a hip-hop song released by UK artist Jay Spades that was clearly paid for by Daniel Kinahan, with Jay Spades spitting bars like, "Marked for death, everything was a setup, 20-minute calls to police, no pickup," alongside claims the government wanted Kinahan dead, but he's untouchable. Essentially an entire song of a rapper from Tottenham randomly deciding to dick ride an Irish gangster. It's so unorganic that it's actually hilarious Kinahan thought that this could have any real impact. The next step of his PR campaign was a slightly more high-budget affair, however, with a 15-minute so-called documentary released on YouTube. And no, I'm not talking about one of my videos, because the videos that I make from my mum's basement are highly professional. Thank you. Daniel Kinahan's documentary was titled The Regency: Discover the Truth, and featured over 100 actors participating in a propaganda film, again, designed to make the attack on the Regency seem like a conspiracy. This documentary was pushed and promoted by those on the MTK payroll, and you can still find it on YouTube today. This was not a low-budget effort, and it's clear that Daniel Kinahan was both fully committed to trying to whitewash his image and delusional enough to think that it could work, and people would just forget the insane war that his gang had carried out just a few years earlier. These PR attempts were pathetic, but Daniel Kinahan was about to significantly up the ante, and it would change his life forever. His rise to the top of boxing had been supercharged by a Tyson Fury comeback announcement video, and it was a Tyson Fury video that would end up proving to be the downfall of Daniel Kinahan in boxing. For years and years, without a shadow of a doubt, the biggest fight in British boxing, and quite possibly the entire world, would have been a proposed clash between heavyweight giants Tyson Fury and Anthony Joshua. It doesn't quite hold the same luster in 2024, but a few years ago, when both were world champions, this was a fight that would have sold out Wembley 10 times over. But for various reasons, the biggest fight in British boxing history had proved impossible to make happen. Issues such as Tyson Fury's mental health collapse, or the intense rivalry between promoters Eddie Hearn and Frank Warren, prevented fans from getting to see the fight that they craved most, with both fighters taking different paths and seemingly destined to never fight. But according to Tyson Fury, the fight was on in 2021 for all the marbles in the heavyweight division, and the man who made it all happen and made British boxing fans' dreams come true was Mr. Daniel Kinahan.
Hello there, I'm just after getting off the phone with Daniel Kinahan. He's just informed me that the biggest fight in British boxing history has just been agreed. Get up there, my boy! Big shout out, Dan. He got this done. Literally over the line. 2-fight deal. Tyson Fury versus Anthony Joshua next year. One problem?
It's no coincidence that the fight announcement video is almost entirely Fury talking up Daniel Kinahan, as we know from his documentary and hip-hop propaganda attempts that he was desperate to try and improve his image, and had almost certainly asked Fury to make sure that people knew that he'd been the man to deliver them what they'd been waiting for, probably assuming this to be a masterstroke that would cement his move from fugitive cartel boss to the main man in boxing. But it would prove to be anything but a masterstroke. In fact, it backfired horribly, and the backlash was immediate and extreme, far beyond even the bad publicity from the Regency Hotel incident, given that the news of the Fury-Joshua fight made waves around the globe. The very next day after Fury's fight announcement, Irish Prime Minister Leo Varadkar told Irish politicians that he was taken aback that Fury had name-dropped the infamous crime boss in his video, and confirmed that discussions were ongoing between Irish and UAE police to extradite Kinahan back to Ireland to face justice. He also stated that his government would be raising the issue of Kinahan's involvement with all broadcasters intending on airing the fight, as well as writing to the British government to express their concerns. These statements whipped up a media frenzy, and before long, people were more focused on discussing Kinahan's involvement than discussing the monster fight that he'd managed to put together. And all the hassle and grief this fight caused Kinahan would prove to be for nothing, considering the fight between AJ and Fury never even ended up happening, due to Deontay Wilder suing Tyson Fury over a rematch clause, with the court ordering the Fury v Wilder trilogy to be made, scuppering the proposed fight with AJ. The consequences of Kinahan revealing himself to the world via Fury as a man capable of pulling strings in boxing globally would continue coming. Kinahan's role in boxing seemingly hastened a US-led investigation into him and his cartel, with a US DEA source saying that Kinahan flew too close to the sun. Kinahan had been under DEA investigation since 2017, and in early 2022, the DEA were in a position to act, and they acted with a vengeance, ending Kinahan's influence in boxing overnight, with a devastating press conference announcing sanctions against Kinahan and over 600 associates, including many figures in boxing who had been on his payroll. For years, Kinahan had been able to ignore the likes of Irish police, UK police, Europol, etc., while living out in Dubai. But the announcement that he and his cartel were officially added to the US sanctions list was an absolute hammer blow. Almost immediately, his life and career in boxing fell apart, with everyone and anyone connected to him trying desperately to distance themselves. Former allies such as Bob Arum turned their back on Kinahan immediately, and his fighters were either forced to turn silent or distance themselves publicly. Even the United Arab Emirates had enough and froze Kinahan's assets, seemingly indicating a willingness to begin the process of extraditing Kinahan to face justice after years of hiding out in Dubai. Less than a week after the sanctions and the $5 million bounty placed on Kinahan was announced, MTK Global, the world's biggest boxing management firm that was definitely not funded and run by Daniel Kinahan, abruptly announced that it would be shutting down with immediate effect, releasing all of its fighters and closing down its network of gyms. Kinahan's rise to the top of boxing had been as unbelievable as the comeback of Tyson Fury, but his decision to seek legitimacy and his belief that he could whitewash a reputation stained with blood spilt across the streets of Ireland ended up undoing all of his work and massively harmed the operations of his cartel. With his assets frozen by the UAE authorities and his career in boxing completely finished, Daniel Kinahan has largely disappeared from the limelight, as the net appears to finally be closing on him. He hasn't yet been extradited from the UAE, and it's not clear whether he is in Dubai or if he fled shortly after the US sanctions were announced. Some media reports suggest Kinahan and his family fled their base in Dubai and have relocated to Iran, desperately hoping to avoid extradition and the lifetime in prison that would surely await him. Whether this is true or not, I don't know, but one thing is for sure, Daniel Kinahan's time in the spotlight is absolutely over, and he will live out the remainder of his life either looking over his shoulder fearing extradition or locked up in a prison cell. A far cry from the days of luxury Dubai living and taking over boxing. The fallout from Kinahan's involvement in boxing continues to this day, with stories coming out in court of fighters' bank accounts being used to wash millions in dirty money, and boxers still being asked to defend their association with an international fugitive and crime lord. Additionally, fighters linked to the Kinahans, including Tyson Fury, Tommy Fury, and Darren Till, are seemingly unable to enter the US to this day. The fact that a man with a reputation as grotesque as Daniel Kinahan was able to penetrate the boxing industry as deeply as he did should be concerning. But if history tells us anything, then it's probably not the last time that we see boxing and organized crime cross paths. The end. Thank you so much for watching the video. If you enjoyed, then check out this video on the fighter who faked wins and lied his way into the UFC. Drop a like and subscribe for more videos just like this one, and check out my football and American football channels linked in the description if you enjoy those sports. I'll see you in the next video. Peace.